Please stop. Please. That's all I have." She was on her knees in the mud, both hands reaching up begging. And the boy standing over her laughed. He laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Then he grabbed her crutches, the ones she'd saved 11 months to buy, raised them above his head, and snapped them in half. The crowd watched. Phones out, nobody moved. Nobody until a motorcycle engine cut through the silence like a knife. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. She had learned a long time ago that the world was not going to slow down for her. Not when her father's car was hit on Highway 93 4 years ago. On a Tuesday evening in November, rain falling sideways, visibility almost zero. Not when she woke up in the hospital 3 days later, and the first thing the doctor told her gently, carefully, like he was handing her something fragile, was that her right leg had sustained damage that would be permanent. Not when she was 22 years old, studying mechanical engineering at a state university in Montana, carrying a full course load, working nights at a grocery store, and still managing somehow to hold herself together with nothing more than stubbornness and the faintest outline of a dream she refused to let go of. Her name was Emma Whitmore, and she had spent 4 years learning how to live inside a body that had been changed without her permission. She didn't talk about it much. Not to her professors, who sometimes gave her extra time on exams and thought that was enough. Not to her classmates, who occasionally held doors open for her with that particular kind of look, somewhere between pity and discomfort, that made her feel like a problem someone was trying to politely solve. Not even to her mother, Sarah, who still cried sometimes when she thought Emma couldn't hear her, standing in the kitchen at night, quietly falling apart over a daughter who was fighting too hard to let herself fall apart at all. Emma saved her voice for the things that mattered. For her engineering coursework, which she attacked with the kind of focus that made her lab partners nervous. For her design notebooks filled cover to cover with sketches and measurements and calculation, all of it pointing toward one central idea. One project she had been quietly building in her mind for years. Affordable mobility equipment. Crutches walkers, bracing systems designed from the ground up to fit the bodies of real people who needed them. Not the average measurements of some theoretical patient priced not for insurance companies and hospital procurement departments, but for people who worked double shifts and still couldn't afford what their doctors recommended. She knew what that felt like. She had lived it. For months after the accident, Emma used the standard crutches the hospital provided. Aluminum, adjustable, generic. They dug into her armpits, threw her balance off, left bruises along her ribs. The physical therapist told her that properly fitted crutches would make an enormous difference. A custom carbon fiber pair designed for her height, her weight, her specific gait, that would give her back something close to real independence. The price tag was close to $900. Emma took a second look at her bank account, and then she picked up an extra shift. She worked nights at Ridgeline Grocery for 11 months. Checkout line stocking shelves, mopping floors at 2 in the morning. When her leg ached so badly she had to stop and press her palm flat against the wall just to keep standing. She saved, she calculated, she waited. And the day she finally placed the order for those crutches, custom-measured carbon fiber built specifically for her body, she sat in her car in the parking lot and cried for about 45 seconds and then wiped her face and drove home. Those crutches were not equipment. They were 11 months of her life made physical. Every early morning, every night shift, every dollar she had chosen not to spend on something easier. All of it folded into 2 lightweight rods of carbon fiber that allowed her to walk across a college campus without feeling like she was losing a fight with her own body. She wore them like armor. She walked like someone who had earned every step. And on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October, standing outside the engineering building with her backpack over one shoulder and her lab notebook tucked under her arm, waiting for the rain to ease up enough to cross the courtyard. She had no idea that the next 10 minutes were going to take all of that away from her. Ethan Cole was the kind of person who had never once been told that the world did not actually revolve around him. His father was a property developer with enough money and enough connections to ensure that most problems involving his son got quietly reclassified as misunderstandings. Ethan had grown up in that ecosystem of protected consequence, where someone else always cleaned up, always smoothed over, always made the phone call that made things go away. He was 23, broad-shouldered, athletic, in the way that came from having access to good facilities, rather than from working particularly hard. And he moved through the university the way people move through spaces they believe belong to them by default. He had two friends who operated the same way, Derek Walsh and Cody Harmon. The three of them had been inseparable since freshman orientation, united by a shared talent for finding the weak spot in a room and applying pressure to it. They had noticed Emma Whitmore approximately 2 months earlier. It had started small, a comment in the hallway just loud enough for her to hear, a snicker when she navigated a doorway, something muttered in a study space that made the people nearby go quiet and look at their phones. Emma had learned to keep walking. Keeping walking was the strategy. Don't give them the reaction they're looking for. Don't hand them that satisfaction. But 2 months is a long time to keep walking. She didn't know yet about the videos. She didn't know that Derek had been recording short clips of her crossing campus, climbing stairs and navigating the cafeteria, and sharing them in a group chat that had eventually expanded to include dozens of students. She didn't know about the comments beneath those clips. She didn't know the nickname they had given her. She didn't know how many people who smiled at her in the hallway had also laughed at her on a phone screen the night before. She found out on a Thursday afternoon in October in the rain outside the engineering building. Ethan stepped in front of her. He was smiling the way people smile when they've already decided how a conversation is going to go. "Hey," he said. "Emma Wright." She looked at him. "I'm going to class. I just want to talk." He glanced back at Derek and Cody, who had spread out slightly, creating a loose triangle around her. Not threatening technically, just surrounding. "You know people talk about you, right, like around campus?" "Move," she said. Her voice was flat. She had learned that flat was better than angry. Angry gave them fuel. "I'm serious. People recognize you." He tilted his head and his smile stretched into something uglier. "You kind of stick out, you know." She started moving around him. He stepped sideways. "I'm just saying I've seen some pretty funny stuff online." He pulled out his phone. "You want to see Get Out of My Way? It's pretty entertaining, honestly. Like the way you..." He started mimicking something with his shoulders, an exaggerated rolling motion. And Derek laughed behind her, and Cody laughed, and a few of the students standing nearby under the overhang started watching. And Emma felt something inside her go very cold and very quiet. "Stop," she said. "I'm not doing anything," Ethan said, still smiling, still moving his shoulders in that mocking rhythm. It's kind of hard to miss, you know, the whole..." He gestured at her crutches. "Those are mine. Do not touch them." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, amusement. The specific kind of amusement that comes from realizing you found the thing someone most wants you to leave alone. He looked at the crutches. Then he looked at her. And Emma saw it happen in real time, the decision forming behind his eyes. "How much do those cost anyway?" he asked in a tone that made it clear he already knew the answer and found the number embarrassing. "They look expensive." "Walk away," she said. "Do you get a discount? Or does someone pay for them? I'm genuinely curious." He reached out and grabbed the left crutch. She felt it like a physical shock. The sudden shift in her balance, the loss of support on one side, the immediate scramble. Her body made to compensate and she grabbed for it back, and Derek caught her other arm, not violently, just enough to unsteady her further, and she went down onto one knee in the wet courtyard, and the rain was coming harder now, and she could hear people around her, and none of them were moving. "Let go," she said, and her voice was not flat anymore. "They're just crutches," Ethan said, holding them above her head. "It's not that serious. Give them back." She was looking up at him from the ground, rain hitting her face, her right hand pressing into the wet concrete, and the words came out careful and controlled because she was using every single bit of focus she had to stay controlled. "Ethan, give them back right now." "Say please," Cody said and laughed. "Please," she said. She hated herself for saying it. She said it anyway. "Please, they cost $900. I saved for 11 months to buy them. They are custom fitted to my body. Please." Ethan looked at Derek. Derek looked at Cody. And then Ethan raised the crutches above his head, both of them, and brought them down across his knee. The sound they made, that sharp, catastrophic crack of carbon fiber giving way, went through Emma like something physical. She heard someone nearby gasp. She heard Cody laugh. She saw phones go up around the edges of the courtyard, 10, maybe 15 people recording, and none of them stepped forward, and none of them said, "Stop," and the pieces of her crutches fell into the mud around her, and she looked at them, and something in her chest folded inward like a page being crumpled. Oops, Ethan said. She didn't cry right away. She sat in the mud for a moment, completely still, looking at the pieces of the thing that had cost her 11 months of her life, and she felt the particular devastating kind of grief that comes not just from losing something, but from understanding exactly how alone you are in that loss. Then she cried, not loudly, not dramatically. She pressed her hand over her mouth and the tears came, and she couldn't stop them. And she was sitting in the mud in the rain outside the engineering building, and 15 people were filming her, and nobody was coming. The crowd started to shift. Some people moved away, tucking their phones into their pockets the way you move away from something you don't want to have witnessed. Ethan said something to Derek and Cody, and the three of them started walking, and she heard Ethan say louder than necessary, "She's so dramatic." And there was a little laughter, and then they were gone. She was still on the ground. She was trying to figure out practically mechanically the way she tried to solve everything, how she was going to stand up without her crutches. She looked at the broken pieces. She thought about whether any of them could bear weight. She thought about the distance to the nearest building, about handrails, about options. She was doing math in her head because the math was easier to think about than the other thing. The other thing being the faces of the people who had watched. That was the part that was going to stay with her. Not Ethan's face, not the sound of the crutches breaking. The faces of the people who had watched and filmed and stayed very still, like they had agreed collectively that this was not the kind of thing you intervened in, and that agreement required no discussion. It just happened the way a crowd becomes a crowd without anyone deciding to form one. She was so absorbed in her calculation that she almost didn't hear it. The motorcycle engine, it wasn't loud exactly. It wasn't the aggressive revving kind of sound. It was lower than that, a steady rolling rumble that seemed to enter the courtyard from the periphery like weather coming in. She looked up. A man had parked near the edge of the walkway. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, she would guess, with gray in his beard and a leather vest over a dark jacket. He was getting off his bike slowly the way people move when they're not in any hurry because they have already decided exactly what they're going to do. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at where Ethan had gone. He was looking at her. He walked toward her, not quickly, just directly, like a man who had decided on a destination and saw no reason to vary his course. He stopped about 3 feet away and looked at the pieces of the carbon fiber crutches lying in the mud around her. He looked at them for about 4 seconds, and his face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes went very still. Then he looked at her. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was low, not soft exactly, but careful. The way you talk to someone when you can see they're holding something very fragile together. "I'm fine," she said automatically. He looked at the crutches again, then back at her. He didn't point out the obvious problem with that statement. He just crouched down to her level slowly like he didn't want to startle her. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I need to figure out how to—" "Here." He offered her his arm. Not as a suggestion, as a fact. His arm was simply there, extended, available, waiting for her to use it. She looked at it for a moment. She had spent 4 years not accepting arms like that, not because she was proud or not only because of that, but because every time someone offered, there was something attached to it. A look, a performance of helpfulness that was actually about them and not about her. A dynamic she didn't want. But this man was not looking at her with pity. He was not performing anything. He was looking at her the way a person looks when they see a problem and they're simply factually interested in solving it. She took his arm. He helped her stand, steadily, without making it into anything. When she was upright, he kept his arm where it was until she had her balance, and then he stepped back and gave her space. "I'm Jack," he said. "Emma." "Emma." He nodded once like he was filing that away. "You go to school here?" "Yes." "Engineering building." He glanced at it. "What do you study?" She blinked. She had expected something else. Any one of the range of things people said in situations like this. "Are you okay? What happened? Do you need me to call someone?" Not "what do you study?" "Mechanical engineering," she said. He nodded again, like that made complete sense, like it was exactly the right answer. "What happened to your crutches?" he asked, direct, no softening around the edges of it. She was quiet for a second. "Some kids," she said finally. Jack looked at the broken pieces again. Carbon fiber, she had told Ethan. $900. 11 months. He didn't know any of that yet. He just looked at the wreckage of something that was clearly not a cheap piece of equipment. Who did this? He asked. His voice had not changed volume. He had not moved. But something in the quality of the question was different from everything that had preceded it, heavier somehow, more serious. The question of someone who was not asking casually. It doesn't matter, she said. It does, he said. Simple, not pushing, just correcting an error. She looked at him. She looked at the gray in his beard, in the leather vest, in the motorcycle parked 10 feet away, and she thought, I don't know this man. I don't know anything about him. And then she thought, he's the only person who stopped. His name is Ethan Cole, she said. Jack nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Just that, okay. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know that the word was a door opening somewhere, that in saying Ethan Cole's name out loud to this particular stranger, she had set in motion something she could not have predicted and would not have believed if someone had tried to describe it to her in that moment, sitting in the mud outside her engineering building, with rain soaking through her jeans and the pieces of her crutches scattered around her feet. She didn't know any of that yet. She just knew that Jack Reynolds had stopped. And in 4 years of learning how to carry things alone, that single fact he stopped was already one of the most significant things that had happened to her. He helped her to a dry spot inside the building lobby. He sat with her on a bench near the doors, and he didn't talk much at first, which she appreciated. He found a vending machine down the hall and came back with a cup of coffee, which he handed her without ceremony. You don't have to stay, she said. I know, he said, and stayed. She drank the coffee. The warmth of it felt disproportionately important. After a while, he said, this happened before. She started to say no. The word was already in her mouth, that automatic protective reflex, the one she had built over years of deciding that it was safer to minimize than to explain. She said yes. He waited. The lobby was quiet. A few students passed through, glancing at them, the college girl and the older man with the biker vest, and looked away. The rain was still going outside, blurring the windows. It's been going on for 2 months, she said, maybe a little longer. What kind of things, she told him. Not all at once in pieces, the way you tell a thing when you're still deciding if you trust the person you're telling. The comments in the hallway, the mimicking, the study space incident she had tried to brush off, the growing sense that it wasn't random, that it was targeted, that Ethan and his friends had decided she was a specific kind of entertainment and had been building towards something for weeks. And then at the end, she told him about the videos. A girl in my lab, Priya, she found one, in a group chat. She showed me last week. There were 8 or 9 of them, maybe more. Videos of me crossing campus or going through the cafeteria line. And the comments underneath, she stopped, wrapped her hands more tightly around the coffee cup. The comments were pretty bad. Jack's jaw tightened. You report it? He asked. She almost laughed, not from humor, from the very precise kind of bitterness that comes from having tried something and watched it fail. I went to the student services office 3 weeks ago, she said. They told me they'd look into it. Then a week later, I got an email saying they hadn't been able to verify a policy violation. Verbal harassment in a non-classroom setting. She shook her head. They basically said if it wasn't in writing, they couldn't act on it. And today, she was quiet. Today was different, she admitted. Today was, I don't know. They've never touched me before. They've never. She stopped again, pressed her lips together, looked at her hands. My crutches cost $900. I worked nights for almost a year to save for them. Jack said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the rain was easing slightly. A couple of students had come into the lobby and were shaking umbrellas near the door, talking about something, their voices bright and ordinary and completely disconnected from everything happening on this bench. 11 months, she said more quietly. I worked 11 months. I know, Jack said, which he couldn't actually know, but it didn't sound wrong. It sounded like the kind of I know that meant I hear you. She looked at him. Why did you stop? He seemed to consider that. Not like it was a hard question, more like it was one that deserved an honest answer rather than a quick one. Because no one else did, he said. She felt that hit somewhere in her chest. That's it, she said. That's enough, he said. She opened her mouth to say something and then closed it. She looked at the broken pieces she'd carried inside and left by the door, not salvageable, she knew, but she hadn't been able to make herself just leave them in the mud. My sister had a disability, Jack said. She looked at him. She used equipment her whole life that never fit right, he said, because we couldn't afford the right kind. She never said much about it. She was tough that way. He paused. But I saw what it cost her. Every day, I saw it. He said this carefully without drama, the way people say things that they have carried a long time. Her name was Rebecca, he said. Past tense. Emma registered that. I'm sorry, she said. She died 8 years ago, Jack said. Heart thing. Not related to? He made a slight gesture. She was 41. Emma said nothing. There wasn't anything adequate to say, so she didn't try to fill the silence with something inadequate. After a moment, Jack said, what did you want to build your engineering project? She blinked. What? You said mechanical engineering. You've got notebooks. He nodded at her bag from which the corner of a design notebook was visible. What were you working on? She looked at him for a second, genuinely surprised by the question, by the shift, by the fact that he'd noticed the notebook. Affordable mobility equipment, she said. He went very still. Crutches mostly, she said, designed for actual people. Custom fit but made at a price that normal people can afford. Not $900, $50, $60, with materials that are available everywhere that can be adjusted that last. She paused. She hadn't actually said this out loud in a while. She usually saved it for her lab notes. I wanted to build the thing I couldn't afford to buy. Jack looked at her for a long time. Okay, he said again, but this time the word had a different weight to it. Less like a door opening, more like something settling into place. He stood up. I'm going to make some calls, he said. You don't have to. I know, he said, again, and he didn't explain further. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the glass, didn't turn around. Don't let them make you invisible, he said. That's what they're trying to do. Make you invisible so they don't have to think about you. Don't let them. Then he pushed through the door and walked back into the rain toward his motorcycle. Emma sat on the bench in the lobby for a long moment after he was gone. She looked at the broken crutches by the door. She thought about 11 months of night shifts. She thought about Rebecca, who had used equipment that never fit because the right kind cost too much. She thought about 20 years from now, and the person she intended to become, and the work she intended to do, and the dream she had been carrying through everything, the accident, the grief, the hospital, the recovery, the savings, the crutches, the videos today, the dream she had never once let go of, even on the worst days. She pulled her design notebook out of her bag. She opened it to a fresh page, and she started writing. Because Emma Whitmore had learned a long time ago that the world was not going to slow down for her. So she was going to have to build something that helped it catch up. That night, Jack Reynolds sat in his house on the east side of Billings and looked at a photograph. Rebecca was 27 in the photo. She was smiling the wide, unguarded smile she reserved for moments. She thought no one was watching, which was when Jack usually managed to get the camera out. She was sitting in the yard somewhere, one of the old lawn chairs that leaned to the left. The equipment she used was just visible at the edge of the frame. Generic. Worn. The kind of thing that worked but never quite fit. He sat with the photo for a while. Then he opened his phone. I went to his contacts, names he'd accumulated over 30 years. People who had ridden beside him through things he wouldn't describe to most audiences, people who understood a particular language that didn't require many words. He started typing. The message was not long. A young woman got humiliated today on campus. Her disability equipment was destroyed. She had saved for almost a year to buy it. She reported harassment to the school weeks ago. Nothing happened. A lot of people watched today. Nobody helped. I'm going back tomorrow morning. Not to fight, to stand beside her. If you want to come, you're welcome. He sent it. Then he set the phone down and looked at the photograph again. I wasn't sure what he expected. It was late. It was a Thursday night. People had jobs, families, distances. His phone lit up. Then again, then 4 times in quick succession. He picked it up, read the messages, set it down again, picked it up again. By midnight, 23 people had responded. By 2 in the morning, the number was 41. He read each response and didn't reply to most of them because most of them didn't need a reply. They said what they said, I'll be there, what time, how far, count, me in, and the messages kept coming. And after a while, Jack stopped watching the count because it had stopped mattering what the count was. What mattered was that they were coming. Mechanics, veterans, fathers with grown kids. Men who had worked 30 years with their hands and women who had ridden longer than most of the boys at the university had been alive. People who understood from their own history, their own losses, their own particular experience of the world, what it meant to need someone to show up and what it meant when nobody did. They were coming, not for revenge, not for violence. Jack had been clear about that because Jack was always clear about that. The Hells Angels had a reputation that preceded them into every room, and Jack had spent enough of his life navigating that reputation to know exactly how to work within it and exactly where its limits were. They were not coming to campus to threaten anyone. They were not coming to intimidate or to escalate or to put more fear into a situation that already had too much of it. They were coming because a young woman had been left on the ground in the mud, and the people around her had filmed it instead of helping. And sometimes the only answer to that particular kind of human failure was an overwhelming, undeniable, impossible to ignore counter demonstration. Presence, just presence. Sometimes that was the whole thing. Sometimes being seen, being witnessed, having someone refuse to look away. Sometimes that was the thing that changed the entire shape of a situation. Jack knew that. He had learned it a long time ago. He looked at Rebecca's photograph one more time. Then he turned off the light. Tomorrow was going to be a full day. Emma did not sleep that night. She lay on her bed in the small apartment she shared with her roommate, staring at the ceiling, running the day through her head. The way you run a calculation you already know the answer to but can't stop checking. The sound of the crutches snapping. The crowd with their phones up. The particular quality of silence that falls over a group of people who have collectively decided not to act. She had memorized all of it without meaning to, the way you memorize things that hurt you involuntarily, permanently, the details burning themselves in. She kept coming back to one moment. Not the breaking, not even Ethan's face when he did it. The moment just after, when she was on the ground and she looked up and scanned the crowd and understood, not suspected, not feared, but understood with complete clarity that no one was going to move. That was the part that followed her into the dark. She had the borrowed crutches propped against the wall by her bed. They were old, a spare pair her mother had sent 2 years ago. When Emma mentioned the fit on her regular ones was getting uncomfortable back before she'd saved up for the carbon fiber pair. These were aluminum adjustable, the kind you find in every hospital supply room in America. They were 3 inches too tall for her, and the grips were worn down, and they put weight in all the wrong places. She had spent 20 minutes in the bathroom tonight figuring out how to adjust them to something workable. And when she finally got them to a configuration that didn't make her feel like she was going to tip sideways, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at herself for a long moment. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who had been fighting a long time and was starting to do the math on how much longer she had left. She went back to bed and didn't sleep. At 6 in the morning, she gave up on the pretense of trying and got up and made coffee and opened her design notebook to the pages she'd filled the night before. The sketches were good, actually better than she expected, given the state she'd been in when she drew them. Her mind worked best under pressure, always had, and there was something about the rawness of yesterday that had ironed her focus instead of blunting it. She had pages of structural calculations, joint designs, material cost breakdowns, the beginning of something real. She stared at it for a while. Then she got dressed and picked up the borrowed crutches and went to class, because Emma Whitmore was not going to give Ethan Cole the satisfaction of a single missed lecture. She made it through the morning. 2 classes, 1 lab session, a conversation with her engineering professor about a project deadline that she managed to get through without anything in her face betraying the previous 20 hours. She was good at that. She had built that skill over years, and she was not about to let it fail her now. It was between the lab and her noon lecture that she turned a corner in the hall near the science building and walked directly into Priya Mehta, who grabbed her arm and said with no preamble whatsoever, "I heard what happened yesterday. I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" "No, don't say fine. I already know you're going to say fine." Emma stopped, looked at her. You were going to say fine." "I was going to say I'm managing." Priya did not release her arm. Priya was small and quick and had a particular kind of energy that could fill a room without trying. And right now she was filling this hallway with a ferocity that Emma found, to her surprise, oddly stabilizing. "I saw the video. Someone sent it to the engineering group chat last night. I reported it to the chat admin immediately. And then I spent an hour on the phone yelling at my cousin about how to file a complaint with the university because he went to law school for 1 semester before he dropped out, and I thought he might know something useful. Did he? He said to document everything and get a lawyer. Priya finally let go of her arm, which isn't exactly breaking news. But I also called the student advocacy office this morning. They're actually separate from student services, different department. The woman I spoke to said you should come in as soon as possible. Emma looked at her. You called the advocacy office for me. I called them for me, Priya said firmly, because I am personally offended that this happened on a campus I attend. And if I have to make 40 phone calls to make sure something is done about it, I will make 40 phone calls. She paused. Also, I did it for you, obviously. Something shifted in Emma's chest, small but real. I have a lecture at noon, Emma said. The office closes at 4:30, Priya said. We'll go at 2. It wasn't a question. Emma noticed that and was grateful for it. Okay, she said. 2 o'clock. She got through her noon lecture by writing everything on the board twice in her notes, which was her strategy for staying present when her mind was trying to drift somewhere else. At 2 minutes to 2, she was standing outside the student advocacy office with Priya beside her and the borrowed crutches that were still 3 inches too tall, and she took a breath and pushed open the door. The woman behind the desk was named Carol Simmons. She was somewhere in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a desk covered in organized stacks of paper that somehow still managed to look controlled. She looked up when they came in and said, Emma Whitmore. And when Emma said yes, Carol stood up and came around the desk and said, Sit down, please. Can I get you anything, water? And the ordinariness of that courtesy, the simple human offer of water, made Emma's eyes sting in a way she had not expected. I'm fine, thank you, Emma said and sat down. Tell me what happened, Carol said. From the beginning. Take as long as you need, Emma told her. All of it this time, not the edited version she gave to strangers, not the minimized version she gave to people she didn't want to worry, but the full thing. 2 months of escalating incidents. The videos, the group chat, the student services complaint that went nowhere. Yesterday in the courtyard. The crutches, the crowd, the phones. Carol listened without interrupting. She took notes. When Emma finished, Carol set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk and said, I want to be completely honest with you about what the university can and cannot do, and what the timeline looks like and what your options are. And I want you to know that what happened to you yesterday was not ambiguous. That was destruction of personal property. That was targeted harassment. That is documented now because you're sitting here telling me about it, and I am writing it down. Emma nodded. The complaint that went through student services 3 weeks ago, I'm going to pull that file today, Carol said. Because if there's a paper trail showing this was reported and not acted on, that changes the university's exposure here significantly. She paused. Do you have any evidence from yesterday? I don't have any of my own, Emma said, but there were 15 people filming. Carol's expression stayed neutral, but her eyes sharpened. Would any of them come forward? Emma thought about the courtyard. The phones, the faces of people who had collectively decided to watch. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know any of them. She did not yet know about Lily Chen. She had no way of knowing. Lily Chen was a sophomore she had never met, who had been standing under the overhang of the engineering building with her phone out, who had filmed the entire incident from beginning to end without stepping forward, who had gone home last night and watched the footage 4 times and not slept and was sitting in her own dorm room right now, staring at a video file on her laptop trying to figure out what she was going to do about it. Emma didn't know any of that yet. She just knew that the faces of the people who watched had been blank, and that blankness had felt like a verdict. Carol gave her a form to fill out an official harassment incident report, separate from the one she'd filed with student services, with more specific fields and a reference number and a case coordinator who would be assigned within 48 hours. She told Emma to compile any screenshots, names, or identifying details she could gather about the videos in the group chat. She told her that the university's Title IX office might also be involved depending on how the incident was characterized. She said the word investigation twice in a way that sounded like she meant it. Emma filled out the form. Priya sat next to her and did not say a word, which was exactly right. When they were done and back in the hall, Priya said, "That was good. That was actually good." "It's paperwork," Emma said. "Paperwork that has a case number," Priya said, "which is very different from a verbal complaint that disappeared into a drawer." She pushed the door to the building open. How are your arms? Those crutches look terrible. They're fine. They look like they're from 1987. They work. Emma, they work, Priya. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. She stopped, softened. Sorry, they're uncomfortable, but they work. That's all I need right now. Priya was quiet for a beat. What do you need tonight, like actually need? Food company. Someone to sit in your apartment and not talk. Emma thought about it. I need to work, she said. I need to sit with my notebook and not think about today. Okay, Priya said. Then do that. She hesitated. Emma, yesterday in the courtyard I heard about it from 3 different people before I even got to campus. And everyone who told me about it was saying they couldn't believe it happened, like they were horrified. They were horrified from a distance, Emma said. Nobody moved. Priya had no answer for that. Emma hadn't expected one. It wasn't a question. She went home. She made dinner pasta, simple something her hands could do without supervision, and she opened her notebook and she worked. She drew and calculated and cross-referenced material costs, and she let herself fall into the problem the way she always did, because the problem was the one place where everything had a solution, and the solution was just a matter of finding it. At 9:15, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Jack Reynolds, the man from today. I wanted to check in. How are you doing? She looked at the message for a moment. She typed, I filed a formal report with the advocacy office. I'm okay. A few seconds passed. Then good. You had someone with you, my friend Priya. She was the one who set it up. Good friend to have. Yes, she paused. Type, what did you mean when you said you were going to make some calls? A longer pause this time. She could see the 3 dots appearing and disappearing a couple of times, like he was deciding how much to say. Then I reached out to some people I ride with, told them what happened, asked if they wanted to come back to campus tomorrow morning. To stand with you. Emma read that twice. How many people she typed? Another pause. Then enough. She sat with that for a long moment. The pasta was getting cold. The design notebook was open on the table. Outside, it had started raining again. You don't have to do that, she typed. I know, he wrote back, and she could practically hear the tone calm, certain the same way he'd said it in the lobby. I know I don't have to. She set the phone down and looked at the ceiling. She thought about Rebecca, who had used equipment her whole life that never fit right because the right kind cost too much. She thought about Jack sitting in his house somewhere in this city tonight, having made calls to people. He trusted people who had apparently said yes. She thought about what it meant that a stranger, a man she had known for 4 hours, had done more about what happened to her than the university had done in 3 weeks. She picked the phone back up. Why are you doing this? She typed. The response came back in under a minute. Because I looked at those crutches on the ground and I thought about my sister. And because you were doing the things she never got to do, trying to build the things she needed. And because someone should have stopped it and no one did. So I'm going to stop the next part of it. A brief pause, then get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a different kind of day. She read it 3 times. Then she closed the phone and went back to her notebook and sat there for a while, not drawing anything, just sitting with a particular sensation of being seen accurately without performance by someone who had no reason to look, and trying to figure out why that felt so much more significant than anything else that had happened today. She went to sleep at midnight. She slept better than she had any right to. She didn't know yet what 70 motorcycles sounded like coming across a college campus at 8 in the morning. She didn't know that Jack's phone had been going off until 2 in the morning with responses from people she'd never met, people who lived 2 hours away or 5 hours away and had made arrangements to be on the road by dawn because a man they trusted had sent a message and said, come. She didn't know that in a dormitory across campus, Lily Chen had finally opened her laptop at 11:30 and watched the footage again and reached a decision that had been building in her for 18 hours. She didn't know any of the things that were already in motion while she slept. She just slept, and across the city, Jack Reynolds sat at his kitchen table and drank coffee and watched his phone keep lighting up, name after name after name, people confirming they were coming, and he did not feel powerful or righteous or like a man about to make a dramatic point. He felt the quiet weight of a debt he had been carrying for 8 years, the debt of a promise he'd made to himself, watching his sister struggle with equipment that didn't fit, standing in that specific helplessness of loving someone and not being able to fix the thing that was hurting them. He felt that debt coming up to be paid. He drank his coffee and he waited for morning. By the time his alarm went off at 5:30, people had confirmed they were coming. He put on his vest and his boots and went outside. The sky was still dark. The air had that cold, clean quality of a Montana morning before the world woke up. He stood next to his motorcycle for a moment, and he looked at the sky and he thought about Rebecca one more time. Her laugh, the way she tilted her head when she was listening to something she found genuinely interesting, the worn grip of equipment that had never been made for her specific body. This is for you, he thought. Also, it's for that girl with the notebook. But also, it's for you. He got on his bike and he started it, and the engine turned over with that low, steady rumble, and he pulled out onto the empty road. To the east, the first suggestion of light was beginning at the edge of the sky. He drove. And from different corners of the state, in the dark, one by one, and then in groups 69 other engines turned over and joined him. They came from Billings and Great Falls and Missoula and Bozeman. They came from small towns whose names most people outside of Montana couldn't locate on a map. They came because Jack had asked, and because the story he had told in 35 words had been enough, because the people who received that message understood in their bones from their own experience of loss, and the specific grief of watching someone be left alone, exactly what it meant and exactly what was being asked. They were not coming to make noise. They were coming to make a point that had no words. By 7:30, this convoy was taking shape on the highway outside the city. Inside her apartment, Emma had woken at 6, made coffee, stood at the window and watched the early traffic below, with the borrowed crutches leaning against the frame, and thought, today I'm going to class. Whatever happens, I'm going to class, because she was not going to let them make her invisible. That's what Jack had said. Don't let them make you invisible. She held on to that. She took her notebook. She put on her jacket. She picked up the aluminum crutches that didn't fit and told herself they were enough. And she walked out the door into the morning. And she did not know yet that by the time she reached campus, the sound she was about to hear was going to be unlike anything she had ever experienced. She walked, and 70 bikes kept coming. Ethan Cole woke up at 8 with a headache and no particular concern about the previous day. He showered. He had breakfast. He texted Derek something dismissive about the situation, and Derek replied with a laughing emoji, and that was the full extent of the moral accounting he did on the matter. He got to campus at 8:45, walking from the parking lot toward the main quad, and he saw Emma from across the courtyard, the girl with the wrong crutches, the two tall aluminum ones crossing toward the engineering building with her backpack and her notebook, and something in him responded to the sight of her with a reflexive contempt that he had never once examined closely enough to understand. He started walking toward her. I didn't have a plan exactly. He never did. It was always more improvisational than that. Find the moment, push on it, see what happens. The crowd yesterday had been good. The phones, the laughter, the helplessness on her face. He had thought about it last night and felt a small, warm glow of something he mistook for entertainment. Hey, he called out. Emma heard him. She did not stop walking. Hey, Emma. He sped up slightly. Nice upgrade. Those new ones look way better. Much more. Then he heard it. He stopped walking. Across campus near the east entrance, the first engine sound arrived, low at first like weather in the distance. Then 2 sounds. Then 5. Then something that built so quickly and so steadily that the students crossing the quad began slowing down, one by one, turning toward the sound, reaching that universal pause that happens when a group of people registers simultaneously that something outside the expected range of events is occurring. Emma heard it. She stopped walking. She turned. And 70 motorcycles rolled onto the campus of the University of Montana. They came in formation, not aggressive, not chaotic, but organized, deliberate, the kind of movement that has been practiced enough times to look effortless. They rode at low-speed engines dropping to idle as they entered the main drive, and the sound of them together was not loud in the way of a threat. It was full. It occupied space the way that real things occupy space, with weight, with presence, with the unmistakable quality of something that cannot be ignored. At the front, Jack Reynolds. Emma saw him the same moment he saw her. He eroded directly toward where she was standing in the middle of the quad and stopped 10 feet away and cut his engine. And the silence that followed was the loudest silence Emma had ever stood inside, because 69 other engines cut off within the same 3 seconds, one by one, until the entire convoy had gone quiet, and the only sounds left were the campus sounds, birds, distant voices, the mechanical hum of buildings, and they sounded very small. Jack got off his bike. He walked toward her, and he stopped 2 feet away and looked at the borrowed crutches and did not say anything about them. He looked at her face instead. "You good?" he asked. Her throat was tight. "What did you do?" she managed. "What I said I was going to do," he said. She looked past him at the assembled riders spread out across the campus drive, standing beside their bikes, not moving, not speaking, just there. Men and women, young and not. The leather vests with the insignia she recognized. People who had driven hours to stand on a college campus on a Friday morning for a girl they had never met. "Why would they?" she started. "I told them what happened," Jack said simply. "I told them who you were and what you were trying to build. And I told them nobody moved when you needed help." He paused. "People who've needed help and didn't get it, they tend to show up when they can, in my experience." Across the quad, Ethan Cole had gone very still. I was standing approximately 40 feet away, with Derek and Cody on either side of him, and the confident looseness that was his natural resting state had drained out of his body like water out of a tipped glass. He was staring at the motorcycles. Then at Jack, then at the riders. He was doing the math slowly, visibly, and the math was not coming out in his favor. Derek said something to him. Emma was too far away to hear it. Ethan did not respond. Jack turned, rounded and looked at Ethan across the quad. He did not raise his voice. The quad had gone quiet enough that he didn't need to. "Ethan Cole," he said. The name landed in the silence like a stone. Ethan looked at him. "Do you remember what you did yesterday?" Jack asked. It was the same question he had asked Emma in the courtyard. The same voice, not aggressive, not theatrical, just direct. The voice of a man who found the shortest distance between 2 points and took it. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. He looked around at the crowd of students that had been growing since the bikes arrived at the 70 riders, standing quietly behind Jack and Emma, standing with her borrowed crutches and her notebook and her spine very straight. And something in his face went through several calculations in quick succession and arrived at an expression that was not quite fear, but was close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. "I don't," Ethan started. "You broke her crutches," Jack said. "You filmed her while she was on the ground asking you to stop. You did that in front of witnesses. Now I'm standing here in front of witnesses asking you a direct question. Do you remember what you did yesterday?" The crowd around the quad had expanded. Emma could see students coming out of buildings pulling out their phones, but differently than yesterday. The cameras this time felt different. She couldn't explain why, exactly. Maybe because this time there was something being captured that was larger than one person's humiliation. This time the footage would show something else entirely. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at his friends. Derek was staring at the ground. Cody had taken a small but perceptible step backward. "It was a misunderstanding," Ethan said. Jack let that sentence sit in the air for a long moment. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. No inflection, no sarcasm, just repeating it back so everyone present could hear what it sounded like when it was the only thing in the air. "We were just, you broke $900 worth of equipment that she saved 11 months to buy," Jack said, "while she was on the ground asking you to stop, while people filmed it." He paused. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision." Ethan said nothing. And then something happened that no one had anticipated. Something that would change the shape of the entire day, that would shift what had been a confrontation into something with real consequence. A girl pushed through the crowd at the edge of the quad. She was small, and she looked like she had not slept, and her face was doing several things at once: fear and determination, and the particular expression of someone who has been arguing with themselves for a long time and has finally lost the argument. She walked up to the front of the crowd, past the edge of the riders, and she stopped a few feet from where Emma was standing. Emma had never seen her before in her life. "My name is Lily Chen," the girl said. Her voice was steady but effortful, the way something is steady when you're holding it there deliberately. She looked at Emma. "I was there yesterday. I filmed it. I should have done something and I didn't, and I'm sorry." She held out her phone. "I have the whole thing, everything, from when they first surrounded you. I want to give it to whoever needs it." The quad was absolutely silent. Emma looked at this girl, this stranger who had watched and filmed and gone home and apparently spent the night in her own private reckoning, and felt something complicated move through her. She was not ready to feel grateful. She wasn't all the way to forgiveness, but she recognized what this was. She recognized the cost of walking across a public quad and saying out loud what you had failed to do in front of 70 bikers in a crowd of 200 students in the people you had failed. That cost something real. Who needs it? Lily said again. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Tell me who to give it to. Jack looked at Emma. Emma looked at Lily. Campus security, Emma said, in the student advocacy office. There's a woman named Carol Simmons. Go to her office at 2 o'clock and tell her you have documentation. She paused. Tell her Emma Whitmore sent you. Lily nodded. Her eyes were bright. She pressed her phone to her chest and nodded again and then turned and walked back into the crowd, and the crowd parted for her. And she was gone. The silence stretched for another beat. Then Jack turned back to the assembled riders and gave a single nod, and one by one they began getting back on their bikes calmly without hurry, the way they had arrived. Not leaving, just returning to their positions, just standing by. Emma watched them. She thought about a woman named Rebecca who had never had equipment that fit right, who had spent her whole life compensating for a problem that could have been partially solved if the money had been available. She thought about 11 months of night shifts and the particular weight of the carbon fiber crutches in her hands the first time she carried them home from the shipping box. She thought about her notebook, which was still under her arm, still full of sketches and calculations, and the beginning of something that was not finished yet, but was real. She looked at Jack. What happens now? She asked. He looked at her with the straightforward, unperformative calm that seemed to be his default setting. Now the university does its job, he said, and if it doesn't, we figure out the next step. He paused. But first, you doing okay right now, this minute? She took stock. Her arms ached from the borrowed crutches. She hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. Across the quad, Ethan Cole was still standing there, and his posture had lost every trace of the loose, entitled confidence it had carried yesterday. He looked diminished, which was not the same as defeated, but it was a start. Yeah, she said, and meant it more than she expected to. Right now, this minute, yeah, I'm okay. Jack nodded once. Good, he said. Then let's go talk to whoever needs to hear this. He did not reach for her arm. He waited. Emma adjusted the borrowed crutches, which were still 3 inches too tall and still worn at the grips and still entirely wrong for her body, and she started walking. And 70 riders waited quietly behind her while she did. The walk from the quad to the administration building took 4 minutes. Emma knew because she counted her steps the way she always did on the borrowed crutches, not consciously, just the background rhythm her body had developed to manage uneven weight distribution across equipment that wasn't designed for her. 4 minutes, approximately 260 steps, every one of them watched by a crowd of students that had grown to something she couldn't accurately estimate anymore. She didn't look back. She had learned that looking back cost you momentum, and momentum right now was the only currency she had. Jack walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside, matching her pace without making a production of it. That small thing registered somewhere in her chest and stayed there. Carol Simmons met them at the door of the advocacy office. She had apparently been called ahead. Emma didn't know by whom, and her face, when she saw Jack's vest in the general direction of the morning's events, carried the expression of a woman who had spent 30 years in university administration and had developed the ability to rapidly recalibrate her expectations of any given workday. Come in, she said, no hesitation. All of you. Jack held up a hand slightly. I'll wait out here, he said to Emma. This part is yours. Emma looked at him. You don't need me in that room, he said, not dismissively, as a fact. The same clean certainty he applied to everything. You know what to say. Say it. She nodded once and went inside. Carol closed the door. The office was small and the desk was still covered in its organized stacks, and Carol went around to her chair and sat down and folded her hands and looked at Emma with the kind of focused attention that Emma had learned to identify as genuinely rare. The attention of someone who is not waiting for you to finish so they can respond, but actually listening to what you are saying while you say it. Tell me about this morning, Carol said. Emma told her. She described the quad, the riders, Lily Chen walking through the crowd and handing over her phone. She told it plainly without drama because the facts themselves had enough weight that adding drama to them would have been redundant. When she finished, Carol was quiet for a moment. The video from Lily Chen, Carol said. Have you seen it yourself? Not yet. When she comes at 2 o'clock, I'll need you here as well if you're willing. We'll review it together and I'll document everything in front of both of you. Carol picked up her pen. I also want to tell you something, and I want to say it clearly so there's no ambiguity. She paused. I pulled the file from your complaint 3 weeks ago this morning. The case coordinator who handled it is named Marcus Webb. He flagged the complaint as requiring in-person verification before any disciplinary action could be initiated, and then he went on vacation. She looked at Emma steadily. He did not reassign the case. He did not send you a follow-up explaining the delay. He sent you a form email about policy verification, and then he left for a week. Emma heard that and sat with it for a second. Oh, so it didn't go nowhere, she said slowly. It went to someone who left it on his desk. Yes, Carol said, which is a failure of process that I am going to address separately and internally, but which I am also telling you because you deserve to know that your complaint was not evaluated and dismissed. It was not evaluated at all. Something shifted in Emma's chest. She couldn't have said exactly what it was. Not relief, not exact. More like the specific adjustment that happens when you've been blaming yourself for a system's failure and someone finally shows you the paperwork that proves it wasn't you. What happens now, she asked. Now I file an expedited report with the Dean of Students' office, Carol said. Given yesterday's incident, the physical destruction of medical equipment, which is how I am categorizing those crutches, in the video documentation that is coming at 2 o'clock, we are looking at a formal disciplinary hearing. That process has a timeline. I won't promise you a specific outcome because I am not the decision maker. She paused. But I will tell you that I have been in this office for 11 years, and I have never seen a case with this level of witness documentation request, expedited review, and not receive it. Emma looked at her hands. Can I ask you something? Emma said. Of course. The man outside, Jack Reynolds, he brought 70 people to this campus this morning. Is the university going to have a problem with that? Carol considered this for a measured moment. 70 people arriving on campus and standing quietly without threatening anyone or destroying any property, she said carefully, is not technically a violation of any university policy I can cite. It is unusual. It is attention-getting. It may prompt some internal conversations. She looked at Emma over the top of her reading glasses. But it is not what's going into my report this morning. What's going into my report is what happened yesterday, and the failure of our process 3 weeks ago, and the video documentation that is arriving at 2 o'clock. Emma nodded. One more thing, Carol said. Your crutches, the custom pair that were destroyed. Do you have documentation of the purchase or receipt order confirmation? Anything. I have the email receipt, Emma said, on my phone. Forward it to me today. We will be including the replacement cost as part of the restitution request in the disciplinary filing. Emma blinked. Can you do that? Destruction of personal property on university grounds, Carol said simply. Yes, we can do that. Emma sat in the chair for a moment after Carol said that. Just sitting. The borrowed crutches leaned against the desk beside her. Outside through the wall, she could hear the low ambient sound of the campus that had returned to something like normal motion, the ordinary business of a Friday morning, resuming around the extraordinary thing that had happened in the quad. She thought about the email receipt in her phone. She thought about the 11 months it represented. She thought about the fact that it had occurred to exactly no one, not the student services person, not any of the bystanders, not even Priya in all her ferocious competence, to frame what happened as destruction of property requiring restitution. It had taken Carol Simmons 11 minutes to get there. Thank you, Emma said, and meant it in a way that was too large for the 2 words to carry, but said them anyway because they were what she had. Carol nodded. 2 o'clock, she said. Bring Lily Chen to me. Emma went back outside. Jack was leaning against the wall of the hallway, arms crossed, watching the end of the corridor. He looked up when she came out. His expression asked the question without words. She's filing an expedited report, Emma said. There's going to be a formal hearing. She's including the cost of the crutches as a restitution item. She paused. And the reason my original complaint went nowhere is that the man handling it went on vacation and left my file on his desk. Jack looked at her for a long moment. So the system failed, he said. The system failed, she confirmed, but it's moving now. It's moving now. He nodded. Good. He straightened up off the wall. There's something else you should know. While you were in there, I got a call from Derek Walsh. Emma stopped. Ethan's friend, he wants to talk. Not Ethan, Derek specifically. He says he has something to tell you. She stared at him. Why would he? He didn't say why. He asked if he could meet with you. I told him that was your call. She turned that over in her mind. Derek Walsh, the one who had stood behind Ethan in the courtyard. The one who had grabbed her arm violently just enough to unsteady her, but he had been there. He had been part of it. She tried to read the calculus of why Derek Walsh would be calling Jack Reynolds' number at 9:30 on a Friday morning, and the only math that came out made her feel something she wasn't ready to name. When she said, "He's outside," Jack said, "near the south entrance." He walked over from the quad. Emma exhaled. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's go." Derek Walsh looked up close, significantly younger than he had seemed in the courtyard. He was tall and wide through the shoulders and had the kind of face that defaulted to blankness when he wasn't sure how to arrange it, which right now meant he was standing near the south entrance of the building, looking like he was waiting for a dentist appointment he had already tried twice to cancel. He saw Emma coming and straightened up and then seemed to realize he didn't know what to do with his hands and put them in his pockets. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Emma said. She stopped 5 feet away. She was not going to close the distance further than that, and something in her posture communicated this clearly enough that he didn't try to close it either. He stopped, started again. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know that's..." He glanced at Jack, then back at Emma. "I know that's not enough. I know that doesn't fix anything." "It doesn't," Emma said, not cruelly, just accurately. He flinched slightly. "I didn't think he was going to I thought it was just going to be talking. That's how it usually is. We give people a hard time and walk away, and that's it." He swallowed. "When he grabbed them, I tried to say, 'Hey, don't,' and then it just happened. So fast." He looked at his feet. "I stood there and I didn't do anything, and then they were already broken, and you were on the ground, and I just walked away with him because I didn't know what else to do." Emma listened to all of this. She noticed that his account was self-serving in the way that most apologies are at least partially self-serving. The instinct to present yourself as less culpable than you were, to find the version of events where your failure is more passive than active. She noticed that and filed it without letting it invalidate everything else he was saying. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. He looked up. "Because I've been watching the videos," he said. "The ones Derek, the ones I helped spread around. For 2 months. I thought it was, I don't know what I thought. It was just how we operated. And then I saw you on the ground and I saw your face when he broke them. And I went home last night and I couldn't." He stopped. His jaw was working. "My little brother has cerebral palsy," he said. "He uses a walker. And I went home and I saw him in the kitchen and I felt sick." The courtyard had been quieter here away from the main quad. Emma could hear her own breathing. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I'm asking genuinely. You came to find me this morning. What do you want?" He looked at her steadily for the first time. "I want to tell the truth," he said, "to whoever needs to hear it. I was there. I know what happened. I know it wasn't the first time. I'll say that to whoever you need me to say it to." Emma looked at him for a long time. She thought about the faces in the crowd, the phones, the blankness. She thought about what she had said to Priya. They were horrified from a distance. Nobody moved. She thought about the difference between the people who watched and said nothing afterward, and Derek Walsh, who was standing in front of her now, with his hands in his pockets and his jaw tight and the name of his little brother still hanging in the air between them. 2 o'clock, she said. "Student Advocacy Office, Carol Simmons. You tell her what you told me and you answer whatever she asks." "I'll be there," he said. "If you don't show up." "I'll be there," he said again, and this time the repetition had a different weight to it. She nodded once and turned and walked back toward Jack. Jack had not said a word during the exchange. He fell into step beside her now, and they walked in silence for a moment. "You believe him?" Jack asked. "I believe his brother has cerebral palsy," she said. "I believe that's real." She adjusted the crutches. The grip on the left one had shifted, and she needed to reset it. "Whether he shows up at 2 o'clock is the part I'll believe when I see it." "Fair," Jack said. They were passing through the main quad again. The crowd had thinned but not disappeared. Small groups of students stood around the edges, talking as some of them, looking at their phones, some of them looking at the riders who were still parked along the main drive in that quiet, patient formation. Emma noticed that several of the riders had gotten into conversations with students. Not confrontational conversations, just conversations. A woman in a leather vest was talking to a cluster of 3 students near the parking area. and whatever she was saying had their complete attention. A man with gray at his temples was listening to a student who was talking rapidly with his hands, and the man was nodding. "Who are they?" Emma asked. She wasn't sure how else to phrase the question. "People who've been through things," Jack said simply. "Most of them have a version of a story like yours. Not the same, but a version. Someone who got left on the ground. Someone who needed help and didn't get it. Some of them from a long time ago." He paused. "Some of them not that long ago." She looked at a woman near the south bike, mid-40s, steady eyes, the particular quality of stillness that comes not from passivity, but from knowing exactly how much force you have available and choosing not to use it. "She okay?" Emma asked, nodding toward the woman. "That's Deborah," Jack said. "She drove 4 hours." He paused. "Her daughter had a disability, used a wheelchair. Died 4 years ago, nothing to do with the disability, just a bad situation that went wrong. But Deborah spent about 10 years watching people treat her daughter like she was less than. She got my message last night, and she was on the road by 4 this morning." Emma stopped walking. She looked at Deborah across the quad. Deborah didn't see her looking. She was watching the students around her with that calm, steady attention, and she looked like someone who had found a purpose that was adequate to the size of what she'd lost. Emma didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that was proportionate to that. She started walking again. At 11:30, Priya appeared at her elbow outside the library and said, "I heard about the quad. I heard about the riders. I also heard that Derek Walsh is saying Ethan orchestrated the whole 2-month campaign, not just yesterday, and that he's willing to testify to that. Please tell me that's true." "Where did you hear that?" Emma said. "Marcus in the engineering lab heard it from the girl who was standing near the south entrance when you talked to him." Priya looked at her. "Campus is the size of a small town. There are no secrets here after 9 a.m. Emma exhaled. "He's coming at 2 o'clock, she said, "to Carol's office." Priya's eyes went wide. "Emma, do you understand what that means for the case?" "It means we have an eyewitness who was actively involved," Emma said. "Yes, I understand." "It means Ethan cannot call it a misunderstanding anymore," Priya said. "It means his 2-month-long harassment campaign has a witness who will say it out loud in a formal setting." She grabbed Emma's arm briefly. "This is Emma. This is actually significant." "I know," Emma said. "Are you okay?" Emma considered the question honestly, which was something she had started doing more of in the last 24 hours. Not the automatic and "I'm fine," but the actual internal check. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm on crutches that don't fit me. And I'm tired, and I have a lab report due Monday that I have not started. But I think I'm okay." Priya looked at her for a moment. "Your mother called me," she said. Emma blinked. "My mother called you?" "This morning, she saw something about the university on a local news website. Apparently someone posted about the motorcycles online, and it got picked up, and she called you, and you didn't answer because you were in Carol's office. And so she called me because I'm your emergency contact, and she wanted to know if you were safe." Emma felt something twist in her chest. She pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls. Sarah Whitmore. The timestamp spanned from 9:20 to 9:51. "I need to call her," Emma said. She also said, Priya added with the particular careful tone of someone delivering information. "They are not sure of the emotional weight of that she is getting in her car." Emma looked up from her phone. "She's coming here. She left Billings at 10. She'll be here around 1:30. Emma stood very still for a moment. She thought about her mother in the kitchen at night crying quietly so Emma wouldn't hear. She thought about 4 years of Sarah Whitmore watching her daughter carry everything alone because Emma had made it clear, not with words, never with words, but in every other way, that being carried was not something she was willing to accept. She dialed. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "Emma." Her voice was the specific texture of a woman who had been holding herself together for several hours by will alone. "Mom, I'm okay. I saw the news. I'm okay. The university is opening a formal investigation. I have documentation. I have witnesses." She paused. "I'm okay." A long silence. Then very quietly, "Are you really?" Emma closed her eyes for just a second. "Yeah," she said. "I actually am. But I could use you here if you still want to come." She heard her mother exhale a long, full breath, the kind that releases something that has been held for a very long time. "I'm already past Billings," her mother said. "I know," Emma said. "Drive safe." She hung up and looked at Priya, who was watching her with an expression of carefully managed fondness. You could have called her weeks ago, Priya said gently. I know, Emma said. You could have let someone help you before it got to the point of 70 motorcycles showing up on campus. I know, Priya. I'm just noting. I know. Emma looked at her. I'm working on it. Priya nodded once satisfied. Good. Now eat something. You look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. She hadn't, actually. Not since the coffee at 6 this morning. Priya produced a granola bar from somewhere in her bag with the efficiency of someone who had anticipated the situation, and Emma took it and ate it and felt marginally more capable of facing the rest of the day. At 12:45, while Emma was sitting in the engineering library going through her email to find the receipt for the crutches, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Thomas Cole. I'm Ethan's father. I'd like to speak with you before any formal meeting takes place. I think there may be some misunderstanding here that we can resolve privately. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Emma read the text 3 times. She felt the specific quality of cold that comes not from fear but from recognition. She recognized this move. She had read about it, she had heard about it, she had seen the shape of it in other people's stories. The phone call before the formals process, the private resolution, the language of misunderstanding and resolve, that was actually the language of disappear and be quiet. She forwarded the text to Carol Simmons with a single line. Ethan Cole's father just texted me, thought you should know. Carol's response came back in 4 minutes. Do not respond to him. Do not agree to any private meeting. Come to my office at 1:45 instead of 2:00. Emma put her phone away. At 1:28, a car pulled into the campus visitor lot and Sarah Whitmore got out. Emma saw her from the window of the library, her mother moving through the parking lot with her coat half buttoned and her hair pulled back in the quick, functional way she wore it when she was focused on something other than appearance. She had a bag over her shoulder, and she was walking fast, and she looked from a distance exactly the way Emma remembered her looking on the morning after the accident, like someone who had decided that the world was going to have to deal with her today, whether it was ready or not. Emma went downstairs. She pushed through the library door, and her mother was right there coming up the path, and they met in the middle, and Sarah grabbed her and held on with both arms, and Emma let her, which was the part she had spent 4 years not doing. She let her mother hold her, and she stood there in the cold October air, with the borrowed crutches and the aching arms and the lab report she hadn't started, and the text from Ethan's father saved in her phone, and she let someone hold on to her for 30 full seconds without trying to communicate that she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was managing, which was different, and her mother deserved to know the difference. I'm here, Sarah said into her hair. I know, Emma said. They stood there. Then Emma pulled back and looked at her mother's face and said, I need to be in Carol Simmons' office at 1:45. That's the woman who's running the investigation. Will you come with me? I'm not leaving this campus until I know you're okay, her mother said. So yes, absolutely yes. They walked together toward the administration building. Sarah looked at the borrowed crutches without saying anything about them, which was the right call. She asked about Carol. She asked about the formal process. She asked carefully in the way she always asked things she suspected Emma didn't want to be asked about Jack Reynolds. He's the man who stopped, Emma said. I gathered that from what I read online, Sarah said. What's he like? Emma thought about how to answer that. She thought about the lobby bench and the coffee from the vending machine and the, I know that meant I hear you. She thought about the photograph of Rebecca and the 35-word message that had brought 70 people to a university campus at dawn. He's someone who made a promise to himself a long time ago, she said, and he kept it. Sarah Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to thank him. I know, Emma said. You can. He's still here. Carol's office at 1:45 had more people in it than it had been designed for. Emma and her mother, Priya, who had simply followed them in with the brisk purposefulness of someone who considered herself essential to the proceedings and was correct. Carol herself, and a man Emma didn't recognize who Carol introduced as Richard Hahn, the Associate Dean of Students, who had apparently made himself available on short notice at Carol's specific request. Richard Hahn was in his early 50s and had the measured, careful quality of a person in his position who had learned to calibrate between institutional caution and actual justice, and was, in Emma's rapid assessment, a person who had thought seriously about where that line was. I want to be transparent with you about where we are, Richard said, sitting across from Emma. We have received the complaint filed this morning by Carol's office. We have received a copy of the original complaint from 3 weeks ago, and documentation of its handling. We have 70 people currently on our campus who have, not to my knowledge, violated any policies but whose presence is," he paused, "significant. And we have a call from a trustee this morning." Emma felt her mother go still beside her. "A trustee," Emma said. "Harold Cole," Richard said. "Ethan's father sits on the university board of trustees." The room absorbed that for a moment. Emma thought about the text on her phone. "I'd like to speak with you before any formal meeting takes place." She thought about the word privately. She thought about the specific machinery of money and institutional access, the way it moved through systems like water through cracks, finding every small opening. "He texted me this morning," Emma said. "I forwarded it to Carol." Richard nodded. "I'm aware." He looked at her steadily. "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Harold Cole's trusteeship does not affect the disciplinary process. It cannot. The process has its own structure and its own timeline and its own appeal system, and no trustee communication constitutes part of that process." He paused. "What it does mean is that this situation has the attention of people at a level above my position, which means everything we do from this point forward is being done carefully by the book and with full documentation." "Does that mean it goes slower?" Priya said from the corner. "It means it goes right," Richard said. The door opened. Everyone in the room looked up. Lily Chen stood in the doorway with her phone in both hands and her face doing that same thing it had done in the quad. Fear and determination in the expression of someone who had lost their argument with themselves and was moving forward anyway. "I'm here," she said. "I have everything." She came in. Carol pulled up a chair. The door closed, and then Lily Chen pressed play. The footage was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. It was steady. She had held her phone with both hands, which was how Emma knew she had made a deliberate choice to capture it rather than the reflexive phone-out impulse of a bystander who wasn't thinking. The audio was clear. The courtyard acoustics had carried voices well, and you could hear everything: Ethan's tone shifting from casual mockery to something harder when he sensed she wouldn't give him the reaction he wanted. The specific moment when he reached for the crutch, Emma's voice saying, "Please," that single word audible and clear, and stripped of everything except the actual meaning of it. The room was completely silent while it played. When it ended, Carol reached over and pressed stop and looked at Richard. Richard was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is not a misunderstanding." And then the door opened again. This time it was Derek Walsh, 15 minutes early, standing in the doorway in a gray sweatshirt with his hands in the front pocket, and his eyes moving quickly around the room and landing on Emma with an expression that was not quite guilt and not quite courage, but was somewhere in the complicated territory between them. "I said I'd be here," he said, looking at Emma, only at Emma. She looked back at him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. Richard Hand looked at Emma. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "before we continue, I want to ask you directly, what outcome are you looking for here?" The room waited. Emma thought about Ethan's face in the courtyard. She thought about what she had written in her notebook that morning. The joint design, the material cost, the beginning of something that would outlast all of this by years. She thought about Jack in the hallway saying, "This part is yours." She thought about her mother beside her shoulder, pressed slightly against her shoulder, the warmth of that contact that Emma had spent 4 years keeping at a careful distance. She looked at Richard Hahn. "I don't want destruction," she said. "I want accountability. I want the process to run correctly without his father's money bending it. I want Derek to say what he knows. I want Lily's footage to be part of the record." She paused. "And I want my crutches replaced." She said the last part simply, without apology, because $900 was $900 and 11 months was 11 months, and there was nothing dramatic about naming the specific cost of what had been taken from her. It was just accurate. Richard nodded. He looked like a man who had spent years waiting for someone to be this specific about what they needed. "Then let's make sure the process runs correctly," he said. Outside in the campus drive, 70 motorcycles waited in the October cold. Jack Reynolds sat on his bike with his arms crossed and his eyes on the administration building, and he waited the way he had always waited for things that mattered, patiently, without fidgeting, with the particular stillness of someone who has done the thing they could do and now trusts the thing they've started to complete itself. A student walked past him and slowed down and said, "Hey, are you guys going to stay?" Jack looked at him. "Until it's done," he said. The student nodded, started to walk away, then turned back. "What you did this morning," he said. Showing up like that was, he stopped, searched for the word. That was something. Jack looked at the administration building. She did something, he said. We just showed up. The student nodded again and walked away, and Jack looked back at the building and he waited. And the engine stayed quiet, and the morning moved forward into afternoon. And inside the building, a formal process was running correctly by the book with full documentation. And Emma Whitmore was in a room telling the truth with her mother beside her, which was the only place any of this had ever needed to go. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. 7 days. Emma had 7 days to exist inside the space between what had happened and whatever came next, and she was determined to fill every hour of that space with something useful. Not because she was afraid of sitting still, she had learned to sit still through things that would have unraveled most people. But because the notebook on her desk had 30 pages of new calculations in it, and the problem she was trying to solve was real, and real problems did not wait for institutional timelines. She also had a new pair of crutches. That part happened on Sunday, 3 days after the quad. Jack had texted Saturday evening brief as everything from him was brief, asking if she had time the next morning to meet someone. She said yes, without asking who. She had stopped needing the full picture from Jack Reynolds before agreeing to things. She had learned in 4 days that his judgment had a track record she could work with. The someone turned out to be a man named Paul Garrett, who ran a prosthetics and orthotics workshop on the east side of Billings. He was in his 60s, compact with hands that showed 40 years of precision work. And he shook Emma's hand and then looked at the borrowed crutches and made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated clearly that he found their quality offensive. Sit down, he said. Let me take some measurements. I don't have money for, she started. I didn't ask about money, Paul said. She looked at Jack. Pro bono, Jack said. Paul owes me a favor from 2019. We don't need to get into it. Paul spent 40 minutes measuring. He asked her questions about her gait, her typical distances, her shoulder width, the specific points where the old aluminum crutches were creating the most compensation strain. He asked her about the carbon fiber pair she'd lost the specifications, the manufacturer, the adjustment system. He listened the way Jack listened, which was to say without performing the listening, just actually doing it. Then he said, I can have something ready by Wednesday, not identical to what you had, but better. Emma looked at him. Better how? The pair you bought was good, Paul said, but it was a standard custom order. I've been doing this 40 years. I know things the catalog doesn't. He looked at her measurements on his notepad. I can build you something that accounts for your specific gait compensation and your shoulder articulation pattern. It'll be lighter than what you had, and it'll last longer. Emma was quiet for a moment. Why, she said. She was asking both of them. Paul looked at Jack. Some kind of unspoken exchange passed between them, the shorthand of people who have known each other through enough things that certain questions don't require full sentences. Jack told me what you're trying to build, Paul said. The affordable equipment project. He paused. My wife used a walker the last 6 years of her life. We had good insurance, decent coverage. And even with that, the equipment she got was, he shook his head. There's a gap in this field, a big one. The people who need the most help can afford the least of it. He put his pen down. If you're serious about that project, I'd like to be part of it. Emma looked at the measurements on his notepad, then at her hands, then at Jack, who was standing against the wall with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular, which was his way of giving her space to respond to something without the pressure of his full attention. I'm serious, she said. I've been serious about it for 3 years. Paul nodded once like that settled something. Wednesday, he said. Come back Wednesday. She came back Wednesday. The crutches Paul handed her were a shade lighter than her old pair, and the grip was contoured differently fit to the actual shape of her palm rather than a standardized mold. She stood up and took 12 steps across the width of his workshop and stopped. Something was different. She stood there for a second trying to identify it precisely the way she would isolate a variable in a calculation. Then she had it. She was not compensating. The micro adjustments her body made hundreds of times a day with every step, the tiny corrections for uneven weight distribution, for grip positions that were slightly wrong, for the cumulative small errors of equipment that almost but not quite fit, they were not happening. She was just walking. Her eyes stung. She blinked it away quickly because she was not going to cry in a man's workshop over crutches, regardless of what the crutches represented. How do they feel? Paul asked. Like they were made for me, she said. They were, he said simply. She turned around and looked at Jack, who was watching her from the doorway, with that expression she had come to recognize. Not proud exactly, because pride implied he had done something, and he never seemed to think he'd done anything, just satisfied. The particular satisfaction of a problem that has been correctly solved. Thank you, she said, to both of them. And this time the two words were not too small for what she meant, because she meant them specifically, not abstractly, not as filler between larger emotions, but as the precise, accurate acknowledgement of what two men had done on a Wednesday morning for reasons that had nothing to do with what they were going to get back. Paul waved it off. Wednesday next week, he said. Bring your notebook. I want to see what you're designing. She brought her notebook. She always brought her notebook. The Thursday hearing arrived the way things you have been dreading always arrive, not with a bang, but with an ordinary morning that simply happens to contain something extraordinary inside it. Emma woke at 5:30, made coffee, sat with her notebook for an hour, not because she needed to work, but because it was the thing that centered her. Then she showered, got dressed, and called her mother. Sarah had gone back to Billings Sunday night. Emma had insisted, and her mother had resisted and then relented, exacting a promise of daily calls and immediate notification of any developments. She picked up on the second ring. Today's the day, Sarah said. She had clearly also been awake for a while. Today's the day, Emma confirmed. How are you? I'm ready, Emma said. Which was true in the way that you can be ready for things you don't control, fully prepared for your part, fully uncertain about everything else. Call me the minute it's done, her mother said. I don't care what time it is. I don't care if it's 2 in the morning. You call me. It won't be 2 in the morning, Mom. Call me anyway. Okay, a pause. Then Sarah said quietly, your father would be so proud of you. I need you to know that. Emma closed her eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. I know, she said. I'll call you when it's done. She hung up, sat for a moment. Then she picked up her new crutches, Paul Garrett's crutches, the ones that actually fit, and she went out the door. Priya was waiting on the front step. Of course she was. You didn't have to, Emma started. I brought coffee, Priya said, holding up 2 cups. Don't tell me I didn't have to. Emma took the coffee. They walked. The university disciplinary hearing was held in a conference room in the administration building, not the dean's main office, but a dedicated space for formal proceedings, with a long table and chairs on both sides and 3 committee members who sat at the head of it, with the careful, neutral expressions of people who understood that what happened in this room was going to be documented and reviewed. Richard Hahn was one of them. The other 2 were faculty members from the Ethics Review Board, whose names Emma had been given in advance, and had looked up Professor Donna Osei, who taught ethics and public policy, and Professor Bill Tanaka from the law school. Ethan Cole was already in the room when Emma arrived. He was sitting on the opposite side of the table in a blazer she suspected he didn't normally own, with a man beside him in a suit that was significantly more expensive than anything else in the room. The lawyer. She had known there would be a lawyer. What she had not known, what nobody in the room had known, until approximately 40 minutes earlier, when it was quietly communicated to Richard Hahn, was that Harold Cole himself was somewhere in this building. Carol Simmons told Emma this in the hallway before they went in a low voice, with the specific expression of someone delivering information they know is going to require processing. He's here, Emma said. He's not in the hearing, Carol said immediately. He does not have a right to be in the hearing. He's in the building, in the trustees' lounge, which he has access to as a trustee. She paused. His lawyer filed a motion this morning to delay proceedings pending an external review of the documentation protocols. Emma looked at her. Can they do that? They filed it, Carol said. Richard denied it 17 minutes ago. She paused again. Harold Cole is a significant donor to this university. 3 buildings on this campus have his family's name on them. I want you to know that I'm telling you this so you understand exactly what you're walking into, not to discourage you, but because you deserve to have complete information. Emma absorbed that. 3 buildings. She thought about the weight of 3 buildings, the way money accumulated into structure, into concrete, into things with names on them that outlasted the people who'd caused harm in their shadow. Is the process still running correctly, she asked. Yes, Carol said without hesitation. Then I'm going in, Emma said. She went in. The room arranged itself the way these rooms arrange themselves, committee at the head parties on opposite sides, a formality to the air that was not unfriendly but was not warm either. Richard Hahn explained the process. The committee would hear statements from both parties. They would review submitted documentation. They would question witnesses. They would deliberate privately. A decision would be issued within 5 business days. Ethan's lawyer, his name was Martin Reeves, and he had the particular energy of a man who had spent 30 years making problems go away and was mildly annoyed to be in a room where that was proving difficult, opened by characterizing the incident as a conflict that had been mutually escalated, a spontaneous moment that Ethan regretted, and a matter of a student with a clean academic record and significant contributions to university athletic programs. Emma listened to all of this. She kept her face neutral and her hands flat on the table. Under the table, her new crutches were propped against her chair, and the contact of them, their correct weight, their precise fit was grounding in a way she had not expected. Then Richard said, "Ms. Whitmore, would you like to make your statement?" She had written it out. She had also decided not to read it because reading it would have been performing it, and she was not here to perform. She pushed the paper slightly to the side. She looked at the committee. "I want to say something before I get into the specifics," she said. "I don't want to destroy Ethan Cole. I want to say that plainly because I think it's important and I think it might surprise some people in this room." She did not look at Ethan. She kept her eyes on Richard Hahn and the committee. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because what happened to me was part of a 2-month campaign that your institution was told about 3 weeks ago and did not act on, and because the thing that ended that campaign was not your process. It was a stranger on a motorcycle who stopped when nobody else did. And I think that deserves some institutional honesty." Silence in the room. Martin Reeves shifted in his chair. "I'm a mechanical engineering student," she continued. "I'm 22 years old. I lost my father 4 years ago in an accident that also permanently damaged my right leg. I worked nights for 11 months to afford mobility equipment that was custom fitted to my body. That equipment was destroyed in front of witnesses while I was on the ground asking for it to stop. People filmed it. Nobody intervened." She paused. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because I need the record to reflect exactly what happened and exactly what it cost." She reached into the folder Carol had helped her prepare. She slid the email receipt for the crutches across the table. She slid the original complaint form from 3 weeks ago, with the date stamp and Marcus Webb's name on the handling notation. She slid a printed record of the 8 videos that had been shared in the group chat with dates, with timestamps, with the names of the students in the chat, 43 names compiled by Priya over the course of 6 hours the previous weekend. Martin Reeves looked at the 43 names and something behind his eyes recalculated. Finally, Emma said, "I'd like to address one specific thing. Ethan's statement characterized this as spontaneous. I'd like the committee to understand that for 2 months before yesterday, there was a documented, organized pattern of targeted behavior. And I have a witness who participated in that pattern and is prepared to say so under oath." She looked at Richard Hahn. "Derek Walsh is outside this room," she said. "If the committee is willing to hear him, he's willing to speak." Richard looked at the other committee members. A short exchange of glances. Professor Osei nodded. Professor Tanaka nodded. "We'll hear him," Richard said. Ethan's jaw tightened for the first time. The first crack in the blazer and the neutral expression and the careful composure his father's lawyer had presumably coached him into. His jaw tightened and he looked at the door and something moved through his eyes that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but was the specific expression of a person watching a plan fall apart. Derek Walsh came in. He sat down across from Ethan without looking at him. He looked at the committee. His hands were on the table and his back was straight, and he looked like a man who had made a decision at significant personal cost and was going to live inside that decision rather than flinch away from it. He told the truth. All of it, the group chat, the videos, the targeting that had been deliberate and organized and had escalated over 2 months. He said Ethan's name clearly every time it was relevant. He described his own participation without minimizing it. At one point, Professor Osei leaned forward and asked, "Why are you telling us this?" And Derek was quiet for a moment and then said, "Because I have a younger brother who uses a walker. And I went home Thursday night and looked at him and I thought about the things I helped do and I decided I didn't want to be that person anymore. I'd rather face this than keep being that person." The room was quiet after he said that. Martin Reeves asked several pointed questions designed to establish Derek's unreliability as a witness. prior incidents, academic record, motivation for coming forward. Derek answered all of them. He was not eloquent, and he was not polished, and he did not have a lawyer beside him, but he was consistent, and he was specific, and he did not waver. When he was done and had been excused, the room was different than it had been before he walked in. Emma could feel it the way a room changes temperature when something true has been said in it that cannot be unsaid. Martin Reeves conferred with Ethan in a low voice. Then he addressed the committee. He modified the characterization. He acknowledged that the duration of the situation had perhaps been longer than initially represented. He said the word regret 4 times. He suggested that a restorative process rather than punitive action would better serve all parties. Richard Hahn looked at Emma. Emma looked at Martin Reeves. I already said what I'm looking for, she said. Accountability, a correct process, replacement of my equipment. I didn't come here to negotiate those down. Martin Reeves looked at his client. Ethan was staring at the table. It was the first time Emma had looked directly at Ethan since she walked in. She studied his face for a moment, looking for the confidence, the loose contempt, the particular ownership he had moved through the world with. It was gone. In its place was something smaller and less certain, and in a way she had not expected, younger looking. He looked like a 23-year-old who had not yet understood what he was and who was beginning in the most painful possible way to find out. She did not feel sorry for him. She also did not feel triumphant. She felt something much quieter than either of those things, something that was closer to clarity. The hearing ended at noon. The committee would deliberate. Richard Hahn told Emma she would receive a preliminary communication within 48 hours. In the hallway outside, Carol walked beside her and said quietly, "You did well in there." "I just told the truth," Emma said. "That's what doing well looks like in those rooms," Carol said. Priya was waiting in the hall. She looked at Emma's face, did a rapid assessment, and said, "Food, now, no arguments." They went to the campus diner, and Emma ate a full meal for the first time in a week. And Priya talked about something unrelated to all of this, a coding project. A professor she found baffling, the new coffee machine in the engineering lab, and Emma let the ordinary conversation flow over her like water over something that had been dry too long. Her phone buzzed. "Jack, how'd it go?" She typed back, "I told the truth. Now we wait." A pause. Then, "That's all you can do. You okay?" She thought about their question. Thought about the conference room and Derek's voice saying, "I'd rather face this than keep being that person." Thought about Ethan's face, young and uncertain, stripped of the machinery that had made him feel safe. Thought about Paul Garrett's crutches against her chair. "Yeah," she typed. "Actually, yeah." His response came back immediately. "Good. Come by the workshop Saturday if you can. Paul wants to go through your notebook." She stared at that for a second. "He read my notebook. I showed him the photos you sent me. He's been thinking about it since Wednesday. He has ideas." She set the phone down and looked at Priya, who was watching her over the rim of her coffee cup with that sharp, fond, entirely accurate attention. "What?" Priya said. "Paul Garrett wants to look at my project," Emma said. Priya set down her cup. "Paul Garrett, the orthotics guy who built your crutches in 3 days." "Yes." "The one with 40 years of experience who said there's a gap in the field." "Yes." Priya looked at her for a long moment. "Emma," she said, "do you understand what's happening?" Emma looked at her hands, at the crutches leaning against the diner table, at the notebook sticking out of her bag, which she had brought because she always brought her notebook. "Something is starting," she said. "Something started 3 days ago," Priya said. "You're just starting to see the shape of it." The preliminary communication from the committee arrived Friday morning, 43 hours after the hearing ended. Emma was in the engineering lab when her phone buzzed with an email from Richard Hahn's office. She read it twice, then set the phone face down on the workbench and stood very still for about 30 seconds. Then she picked the phone back up and called her mother. Sarah answered immediately. "Tell me." "Ethan Cole and 2 other students have been suspended for the remainder of the semester," Emma said. "Effective immediately. They've been removed from all university athletic programs. They are required to complete 40 hours of disability awareness education and 100 hours of community service before any application for readmission will be considered." She paused. "And the university has issued a formal acknowledgement that the original complaint filed 3 weeks ago was mishandled. They're revising their complaint management protocols and assigning dedicated case coordinators who cannot leave files unattended during active review periods." Silence on the line. Emma, her mother said. The crutches, Emma said. Full replacement cost. The university's liability fund covers it. $912, which was the total with shipping. I'm getting a check. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a word. The system worked, Emma said. And then because it was important eventually, with a lot of help, but it worked. She heard her mother crying. Not the quiet, private crying from the kitchen at night. This was different. Open, not trying to be hidden. Mom, Emma said. I know, Sarah said. I know you're fine. I know everything's okay. I'm crying anyway. That's okay, Emma said. You can cry. She stayed on the phone for 20 minutes, standing in the engineering lab with her notebook on the workbench and her new crutches beside her, and the ordinary sounds of the lab around her. The hum of equipment, a distant conversation. Someone dropping something metal with a clang that rang through the space and faded. When she hung up, she sat down at her workbench and opened her notebook. She had been thinking about a problem in the joint design all week. The way the standard swivel attachment created a stress point under lateral load that would eventually cause fatigue failure in lower-cost materials. She had 3 possible solutions sketched out, none of them entirely satisfying. She looked at them now with fresh eyes, and something that had been stuck in her thinking for 3 days quietly unlocked. She picked up her pen and started drawing. She was still drawing when Priya came into the lab at 2 o'clock and stopped beside her and looked over her shoulder at the sketch. Is that the joint redesign? Priya said. New approach, Emma said. I think I've been overcomplicating the load distribution. If you move the pivot point here, she pointed with the pen, you can reduce the stress concentration by about 30% using a material that costs a quarter of the price. Priya leaned closer. Show me the math. Emma showed her. Priya was quiet for a long moment, working through it. That works, she said. Emma, that actually works. I know, Emma said. It was the first time in the week since her crutches were broken that she felt the specific, clean pleasure of a problem solved. Not resolved, solved. The precise satisfaction of a solution that was correct and would stay correct and could be tested and demonstrated and built. She thought about Paul Garrett in his 40 years in his ideas in the Saturday meeting. She thought about Jack's text, he has ideas. She thought about Derek Walsh saying, I'd rather face this than keep being that person, and the way the room had gone quiet after that, the quality of the quiet, the thing that hung in it. She thought about her father, who had taught her that problems were not obstacles, they were just problems, which meant they had solutions, which meant the only question was whether you were willing to stay with them long enough to find out. She stayed. She was still at the workbench when the lab cleared out at 6 and the overhead lights shifted to the quieter evening setting and the building got still. She had 12 new pages. The joint design, the material alternatives, the cost breakdown that was starting to look for the first time like something a person without insurance could actually afford. She packed up her notebook. She put on her jacket. She picked up her new crutches. Paul's crutches, ones built for exactly her body, and she walked out of the lab into the evening. And she thought the worst week of my life ended in this. 12 pages, a solved problem, a formal process that had finally run correctly. A man named Jack Reynolds who had stopped when he didn't have to and brought 69 people with him when he didn't have to and introduced her to Paul Garrett when he didn't have to and texted her 3 words. He has ideas that had opened a door she had been building toward for 3 years. She thought about Rebecca, whose name she now knew the way. You know a person you've never met but feel you understand through the specific texture of the absence they left in someone who loved them. She walked toward the parking lot where she'd locked her bike, and the evening was cold and clear, and the crutches were exactly right. And somewhere in her notebook was the beginning of something that would outlast all of this by years. She was 22 years old and she was just getting started. She did not know yet about the foundation. She did not know about Paul's connections in the medical supply network or the engineer from Great Falls who would reach out the following month after seeing Priya's post about the joint redesign, or the small equipment manufacturer in Missoula who would express interest in a production partnership 6 months later. She did not know about the first prototype or the child who would test it or what that moment would feel like. She did not know any of what was coming. She just walked out into the evening and trusted that she had done the work and told the truth and let people help her, and that those 3 things together were enough to build something real from. They were. They always had been. She just hadn't known yet that you were allowed to let other people be part of the building. Now she knew. The Saturday meeting with Paul Garrett changed everything. Emma arrived at the workshop at 9 in the morning with her notebook and her coffee and the specific alertness of someone who had slept well for the first time in 2 weeks. Paul was already there. He was always already there. She would come to understand the kind of man for whom the work started before the day officially did. He had her notebook photos spread across the work table printed out and annotated in red pen in handwriting so small it looked like a different language. She stood beside him and looked at his notes and felt something happen in her chest that she did not immediately have a word for. Then she found it. She felt seen not as a student, not as a victim, not as the girl from the quad, but as an engineer, as someone whose work had been taken seriously enough to be criticized, which is the highest form of respect one technical person can offer another. This joint redesign, Paul said, pointing without preamble, your load distribution math is right, but you're still using the standard axial alignment assumption. If you tilt the primary load axis 4 degrees, he picked up a pen and marked it on the printout. You can reduce material fatigue under lateral stress by closer to 40%, not 30. Emma looked at the angle he'd marked, ran it through her head. That only works if the grip interface compensates in the opposite. Yes, Paul said, like she'd confirmed something he'd suspected, which is why the grip design and the joint design have to be solved simultaneously. You've been treating them as separate problems. She stared at the printout. She had been treating them as separate problems. For 3 years, she had been treating them as separate problems because that was the standard approach. Isolate the variable, solve it, move to the next one. She had never once considered solving them as a unified system because the standard literature didn't approach it that way. If they're one system, she said slowly, then the material cost savings compound. Because the grip compensation reduces the load on the joint, which means the joint can be built lighter, which means the total unit cost drops by roughly a third, Paul said. She put her coffee down on the nearest clear surface without looking where she was putting it. Paul, she said. I know, he said. That changes the whole price point. I know, he said again. She picked up the red pen. She started drawing directly on the printout. Paul watched, and after about 40 seconds, he picked up his own pen and started drawing alongside her, and they stood at that work table for 2 hours straight without either of them suggesting a break or a pause, just working the way two people work when they've found the same problem and discovered they speak the same language about it. Jack arrived at 11 with sandwiches in a paper bag. He set them on the end of the table without interrupting and leaned against the wall and waited. Neither Emma nor Paul looked up for another 20 minutes. When Emma finally straightened up, her back ached and her hands had red ink on 3 fingers, and the printouts were covered in both their handwriting, layered over each other in a way that made the pages look like they'd been built rather than annotated. She looked at Paul. This is a prototype we can actually build, she said, with parts that are available, not sourced, not special ordered available, hardware supply level available. Yes, Paul said, and the total unit cost at small scale production, $68, Paul said, possibly $55 at volume. Emma sat down. She sat down because she needed to, not because she was tired. She needed to be at a lower altitude than this number for a moment, because $68 against $900 was a gap so large it was hard to hold steady. My sister paid $800 for what she used, Jack said from against the wall. He said it quietly. In 2003, it wasn't even good. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Emma said, we need to build it. Paul said, I know. Jack said, then let's talk about what that takes. What it took was more than any of them could do alone, which was the point at which most ideas stopped being ideas and became real things. Emma knew that. She had watched enough projects die in the gap between concept and execution to understand that the question was never whether the idea was good. The question was always, who else shows up? People showed up. The first was Priya, who had a cousin in medical device supply chain logistics and spent one Saturday on the phone extracting information that would have taken Emma 6 months to accumulate through normal channels. The second was a retired mechanical engineer named Glenn Marsh from Great Falls, who had seen Priya's post about the joint redesign. Priya had posted a version of the math to an engineering forum with Emma's permission and called Emma's number on a Tuesday at 7 in the evening and said, I've been thinking about this problem for 20 years. I never found your grip joint system approach. Can I be part of this? The third was Deborah, the woman Jack had pointed out in the quad, the one who had driven 4 hours and whose daughter had used a wheelchair, who turned out to have spent 12 years as a nonprofit fundraising director before her daughter died, and who said at a meeting in Paul's workshop in November with 6 people around the table, "You have a concept, a design, a manufacturing path, and a cost model. What you need now is a structure. Let me build you a structure." Emma looked at her across the table. "A structure meaning?" "A foundation," Deborah said. "Legal entity, nonprofit, grant eligible, able to receive donations and direct them toward production and distribution." She paused. I've done this 3 times. I know exactly what it takes." Emma looked at Jack. Jack looked at Deborah. "How long?" Emma said. 6 months to get the 501c3 status, Deborah said. "If we start now." "Start now," Emma said. They started now. The foundation's name was Rebecca's. That was Emma's suggestion, and she made it at the same November meeting quietly. And when she said the name, she looked at Jack, and Jack looked at the table for a moment. And when he looked back up, his eyes were doing the thing that eyes do when something has hit somewhere deep and the person is deciding whether to let it show. He let it show. "Yeah," he said. His voice was slightly different than usual. "That's right. The Rebecca Reynolds Mobility Foundation. Named for a woman who had never had equipment that fit right, built to make sure fewer people had to live that way." Deborah started the paperwork the next morning. The weeks that followed had a rhythm Emma had not experienced before. Not the rhythm of surviving, which was what the past 4 years had largely been, but the rhythm of building. She was still in school. She still had coursework and lab reports, in a thesis proposal that was due in January. In a part-time job, she had cut back to 2 nights a week to make room for the foundation work. She was not sleeping as much as she should have been. Pre told her this regularly, and Emma acknowledged it regularly and kept working anyway, but differently than before. Not alone, not with the sealed-off isolation she had built into a personal philosophy, but at a table with other people who were working alongside her. That was the change. That was the thing that had shifted in October and kept shifting. She let people in. Not all the way, all at once. Emma Whitmore was not the kind of person who transformed overnight, but she let Priya review her calculations before she finalized them. She let Paul push back on her material choices without defending the first version. She texted Jack when something went wrong and didn't spend 40 minutes deciding whether it was appropriate to bother him. She called her mother on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and sometimes just because it was a Tuesday or Thursday and she wanted to hear her voice. She let people in, and the work moved faster and was better. And she was less tired, which she had not predicted, and which continued to surprise her every time she noticed it. In December, the first full prototype was completed in Paul's workshop. Emma held it, a pair of crutches made from the unified joint grip system she and Paul had designed together on that Saturday in October, and walked across the workshop floor, and the mechanics were exactly what the math said they would be, which was both deeply satisfying and faintly incredible, in the way that things always were when theory became object. "Well," Paul said, "it's right," she said. "Of course it's right," he said. "We built it right." She laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, the kind that surprised her by its own volume. And Paul looked at her and raised an eyebrow, and she realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh in 2 months of working together. "You have a good laugh," he said. "You should use it more." "I'm working on it," she said. She was genuinely working on it. January came with the first significant test of whether any of this was real. Deborah had identified a pediatric rehabilitation clinic in Billings, Dr. Nadia Osei's practice, unrelated to Professor Osei from the hearing that served a high percentage of patients on Medicaid or uninsured. Dr. Osei had agreed to review the prototype and consider allowing a patient to test it in a supervised setting. Emma drove to Billings on a Thursday morning with the prototype in the back seat and Priya in the passenger seat, running through a checklist she'd made about the clinical evaluation criteria. Jack met them in the parking lot. He looked at the prototype when Emma carried it in and said nothing, just nodded once and held the door. Our Osei was in her 40s, precise and warm, in a specific combination that Emma recognized as the hallmark of someone who had spent years explaining difficult things to scared people and had found a way to do it without losing either accuracy or kindness. She examined the prototype for 20 minutes, asked Emma and Paul, 9 specific questions about the joint mechanics and material composition, and then said, I have a patient I'd like you to meet. His name was Marcus. He was 9 years old. He had been using a pair of standard pediatric crutches for 2 years that had required constant adjustment because he was in a growth phase, and the equipment couldn't keep up with him, which meant he was perpetually on the edge of the fit range where things started to hurt. His mother, a woman named Danielle, who worked 2 jobs and had the particular exhaustion of someone carrying more than anyone should have to carry alone, had brought him in for what she thought was a routine adjustment appointment. When Dr. Osei explained what was happening, the prototype, the tests, the foundation behind it, Danielle listened carefully and then asked, what does it cost? Right now, Emma said. Nothing. This is a test, but when we're in production, she paused. The target price is under $70. Danielle stared at her. Under $70, she repeated. Yes. Danielle looked at the prototype. She looked at her son. She said, his current pair costs $400. I'm still paying them off. Emma said nothing. She felt that number sit on the table between them, and she let it sit there because it needed to, because the gap between 400 and 70 was not an abstraction. It was months of someone's life, just like 900 had been 11 months of hers. Marcus tried the prototype. I was 9, and he had the energy of a person for whom everything was still new enough to be interesting, and he approached the crutches with the pragmatic curiosity of a child who had been using equipment his whole life and had well-developed opinions about what worked. He stood up, adjusted his grip, took 3 steps, stopped, took 3 more. He looked at Emma. They don't hurt, he said, like that was unexpected, like not hurting was not something he had fully anticipated. Emma pressed her lips together, very firmly. She was absolutely not going to cry in a clinic in front of a 9-year-old. They're supposed to not hurt, she said, and her voice only wavered slightly. My old ones hurt after like 20 minutes, Marcus said with the matter-of-fact delivery of a child reporting a weather fact. These feel, he took 4 more steps, turned around, and came back. These feel like they're mine. Emma pressed her lips together harder. Priya, standing slightly behind her, made a small sound and turned to look at a wall. Jack was in the corner of the room. He was looking at Marcus walking back and forth across the clinic space with Paul's crutches and Emma's joint design and the math that had unlocked itself on a Friday night in an engineering lab. I was looking at that, and something in his face was doing what faces do when a thing you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down somewhere it was always supposed to go. Emma saw him. She looked at him across the room, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing adequate, and they both knew it. She turned back to Marcus. Walk to the end of the room and back, she said, as natural as you can. He walked. Natural, unguarded, the walk of a 9-year-old who was thinking about something other than compensating for equipment that didn't fit. Dr. Osei made notes. Danielle watched her son and pressed 2 fingers to her mouth and breathed through her nose. We'd like to include this in our evaluation program, Dr. Osei said to Emma when Marcus had finished. If the foundation is willing to place units with us for a 6-month study, I can give you clinical documentation of outcomes. Pain reduction, mobility, improvement, quality of life, self-reporting. She paused. That documentation will be significant for grant applications and hospital partnerships. Yes, Emma said immediately. Absolutely yes. Danielle caught Emma's arm as she was leaving the room. Quietly, so Marcus, who was asking Priya 17 questions about engineering in the hallway, wouldn't hear. Thank you, Danielle said. Emma looked at her. It's not finished yet, she said. There's more to do before it's in real production. I know, Danielle said, but you're doing it. She paused. Someone is actually doing it. Emma drove back to Missoula in the late afternoon with the empty prototype case in the back seat and Priya asleep in the passenger seat and the highway opening up in front of her. She drove and she thought about Marcus's voice, they feel like they're mine. And she thought about her father on a highway 4 years ago, and the way loss could be the thing that clarified what mattered so sharply it was almost unbearable. She thought about Rebecca, who had never had equipment that felt like hers. She thought about the October courtyard and the mud and the sound of carbon fiber snapping and the 17 phone cameras and nobody moving. One person moved, one person stopped, and look what it started. The spring semester unfolded like something that had been waiting to happen. The 501c3 application came through in March. Deborah called Emma on a Tuesday afternoon and said, We're official, in a tone of voice that was the specific combination of exhausted and elated that belongs only to people who have completed enormous amounts of paperwork correctly. Glenn Marsh in Great Falls had connected them with a small medical equipment manufacturer in Missoula named Cascade Mobility, whose owner, a man named Ray Torres, had been looking for a partnership that let him diversify into lower-cost products without losing production quality. Ray came to Paul's workshop in April, spent 3 hours with the design, and asked 11 questions about material sourcing, and said, "I can do a production run of 500 units at $62 each. If the clinical results support scale, we talk about 5,000. 5,000 units." Emma sat with that number in the workshop after Ray left and looked at her notebook, and then at Paul, and then at the walls, which were covered by now in design iterations and cost sheets, and correspondence from Dr. Osi's clinic, and 2 other rehab practices that had reached out after hearing about the evaluation program. 5,000, she said. "First run," Paul said. "If the clinical outcomes are what I think they're going to be, 5,000 is a starting point." She looked at him. "You think it's going to work?" He looked at her like the question barely deserved a response. "Emma, I have 40 years in this field. I know what works." He picked up the latest production spec prototype. "This works. The joint system is the most significant design innovation in this product category in 15 years, and I am not being generous when I say that. I am being accurate." She believed him. Not because she needed reassurance, because he was Paul Garrett, and Paul Garrett did not say things he didn't mean, and she had learned that about him in 5 months of working together. She believed him. Her thesis proposal, submitted in January, had been approved in February with the note from her committee that the project represented one of the strongest combinations of technical innovation and real-world application they had seen from an undergraduate in the program. Her advisor, Professor Kim, had asked during the approval meeting if Emma had considered applying for the university's annual Engineering Innovation Award. Emma had not considered it. She applied in March. She found out in April, on the same day Ray Torres called about the production run in a week that seemed to have decided to deliver everything at once, that she had won it. The award included a $5,000 grant toward the recipient's primary research project. She called Paul immediately and he said, "Materials for the first clinical batch and then some. Good." She called Deborah and Deborah said, "That goes on the foundation letterhead immediately. Award recognition matters for grant applications." She called Priya, and Priya screamed in a way that suggested she was either in a very echoey space or had simply decided that volume was the correct response. She called Jack last. "I won the Engineering Innovation Award," she said. A pause. "Of course you did," he said. Simple, not surprised, just accurate. "The grant money covers the first clinical batch materials," she said. "Good." She paused. "Jack." She didn't know exactly what she was going to say, but she knew she needed to say something that was closer to the real thing than the updates she'd been giving him. "I want you to know what you started in October, what you did. I think about it a lot." Silence on the line for a moment. "I didn't start anything," he said. "You started it 3 years ago in a notebook. I just showed up." "You showed up when nobody else did," she said. "That's a low bar," he said, and then quietly, "But I'm glad I cleared it." Graduation was in May. Emma stood in the processional line in her cap and gown with her new crutches, Paul's crutches, which she now thought of as simply her crutches, the way you stop qualifying the things that have become part of how you move through the world, and she felt the particular mixture of completion and forward motion that belongs to the end of one thing and the beginning of something not yet fully named. Her mother was in the audience. Sarah had driven from Billings and arrived 2 hours early and sent Emma 3 texts about parking before 8 in the morning, which Emma found completely unreasonable and deeply comforting. Priya was 2 spots ahead of her in the processional, having arranged this deliberately. "I want to be close enough to celebrate immediately," she had said. "I'm not waiting to find you in the crowd." The ceremony was a ceremony long, in the way that ceremonies are long when they are marking something real, and the weight of the marking has to be acknowledged by length. Emma listened to the speeches with partial attention, the way you listen when you are inside your own head about something, and the external world is happening at a slight remove. She thought about Marcus walking across the clinic floor. She thought about Danielle's hand on her arm. Someone is actually doing it. She thought about Rebecca's photograph on Jack's kitchen table, a woman who never had equipment that fit. She thought about her father, who had taught her that problems had solutions, and that the only question was whether you were willing to stay with them. She thought about a courtyard in mud and the sound of something breaking and nobody moving, and then one motorcycle engine in the silence. One. The processional moved forward. She walked with it. When she came out through the main entrance after the ceremony, her mother was already there, had somehow navigated the crowd with a speed that defied reasonable explanation and grabbed her and held on, and Emma held back, and they stood there for a moment, the two of them, the ones who had made it to the other side of 4 very hard years. He'd have been front row, Sarah said. I know, Emma said. He'd have embarrassed me completely. Her mother laughed through tears, which was exactly right. And then Emma heard it, a sound from the parking area, low at first, then building. The specific, unmistakable rumble of multiple motorcycle engines arriving together. She turned. 70 motorcycles. The same convoy that had appeared in the quad on an October morning. Some of the same people, some she didn't recognize. All of them coming onto the campus of the university in the same calm, deliberate formation, low-speed engines dropping to idle as they came in, filling the space the way they had filled it 8 months ago with presence and weight and the undeniable fact of themselves. At the front, Jack Reynolds. He pulled up to the edge of the walkway and cut his engine and got off his bike and walked toward her. He was wearing the same leather vest. He looked the same as he had in October, steady, unhurried, the expression of someone who is exactly where they meant to be. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her in her graduation cap and gown, with Paul's crutches and the award certificate folded in her bag, and 5 months of foundation work, and a production agreement, and $62 crutches. And Marcus's voice, they feel like their mind still in her chest where she kept all the things that mattered. Congratulations, Jack said. She looked at him. She looked at the 70 bikes behind him. She looked at Deborah, who was there, and Glenn Marsh, who had apparently driven from Great Falls. She looked at Paul, who was parked near the back, with the slightly exasperated expression of a man who had been roped into a convoy and found it more emotionally affecting than he'd anticipated. You came, she said. We were here in October, Jack said. Seemed right to be here now. She stood there for a moment and let it hit her. All of it. October and January and March and May, the notebook and the prototype, and the foundation and the award, the courtyard and the mud and the sound of braking, and then the sound of one engine cutting through the silence, and the whole long chain of things that had followed from that one person deciding to stop. You said something to me in October, she said, in the engineering building, before you left. He waited. You said, don't let them make you invisible, she said. That's what they're trying to do. Don't let them. He nodded like he remembered. I didn't, she said. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said the thing that she would carry with her longer than anything else. From the entirety of those 8 months, longer than the hearing and the prototype and the award, longer than all of it. They only destroyed your crutches, he said. They never destroyed who you were. She held that. She held it, the way you hold something that is true all the way through, not just on the surface, not just as a nice thing to say, but structurally, factually, provably true. They had broken $900 worth of carbon fiber. They had not touched the 3 years of notebook pages. They had not touched the design. They had not touched the joint grip system or the $62 price point or Marcus's walk across the clinic floor. They had not touched the thing that was now a foundation with a legal structure and a clinical partnership and a production agreement, and Paul Garrett's 40 years, and Deborah's 12 years, and Glenn Marsh's 20 years, and Priya's ferocious, precise, indispensable presence. They had not touched any of it, because what you are does not live in your equipment. It lives in what you do with the time after the equipment is gone. Emma looked at the 70 riders. She looked at her mother, who was standing 10 feet away with tears on her face and the expression of someone watching a daughter become the full version of herself. She looked at Priya, who was going to be insufferable about this for at least a month and had completely earned the right. She looked at Paul, whose hands had built the crutches she was standing on and who had said 40 years in this field and who meant every word of it. She looked at Jack. Thank you, she said, for the last time and the most fully. He nodded once. The way he nodded at things that were simply true and didn't require more than acknowledgement. Rebecca would have loved this, he said. Emma smiled. I know, she said. I think she'd have had opinions about the grip design. Jack looked at her for a moment, and then quietly, genuinely, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere real. He laughed. And Emma Whitmore stood on the steps of the university where she had learned everything she needed to know about both engineering and the specific irreducible value of a single person. Deciding to stop, and she felt the May sun and the rumble of 70 idle engines and her mother's presence and Paul's hands and the craftsmanship beneath her palms, and she understood completely, and for the first time without any reservation whatsoever, that strength had never once been about standing alone. It was about knowing when to accept help, and then becoming the person who gave it. She had done both. She was only getting started.